Thank you. I don't have on any earrings, and I'm sorry about that.
All right, so it's 2:01, so I'm going to start.
Please do.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining Saffron for our discussion on do we need to be healed to be in a relationship? We need to be healed. Do we need to be healed to be in a relationship? My name is Tiffany Morgan, and I'm the Chief People Officer of the nonprofit organization Saffron, which stands for Simple Aid for Families Requiring Ordinary Needs. We have three expert panelists who have joined us today for our discussion. First, we have Tracy Miller, who is a registered nurse and who is also the CEO and founder of Saffron. And next, we have Tracy Jones, who is a licensed clinical social worker. And lastly, we have Erica Tumbaga, who is also a licensed clinical social worker. I have a couple of ground rules before we begin. If you can please stay on mute until I say your name, there will be time for questions and answers for our panelists. And if you have a question, you can raise your hand by going to the reactions at the bottom and select raise hand. And please be sure to lower your hand after you finish asking your questions because your hand will remain raised. We also have some polling questions you can answer by going to the chat feature at the bottom of the screen as well. I am now going to turn it over to Tracy Miller to tell us a little bit about Saffron and about the discussion today.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Tracy, as she just mentioned, and I'm the CEO and founder of Saffron, which stands for Simple Aid for Families Requiring Ordinary Needs. Our organization was definitely created out of the need to bring the village back together. And we always say that it takes a village, but I think we all forget that the village is us and it will only ever be us. Black, Latina, and minority communities must look to the past to provide the light for our future by embracing rituals, traditions, and healing modalities of our ancestors. These ways of knowing require decolonization of thought and practice that only together through acknowledging that our traumas matter, that we are more than our worst mistakes, can we truly attain healing, good health, and well-being as we continue what seems like a never-ending quest for racial equality, equity, and justice for our people. Public health data shows that chronic exposure to racial disparities, like what we suffer every day, social and economic disadvantages lead to accelerated decline in mental and physical health outcomes. The World Health Organization, defines health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. But do we really have that? Black health and wellness not only includes one's physical body, but also emotional and mental health, yet it's ignored by so many. At this point in the 21st century, our understanding of Black, Latina, and other minority health and wellness is broader and more nuanced than ever before, thanks to lots of activism, lots of social media and podcasts. But what we really do here at Saffron, we create fun, safe, friendly social atmospheres around giving back and volunteering to help educate, teach health and wellness, and elevate the women and children in need in our communities. In the still overhanging shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic, we at Saffron recognize the need to pivot and create a virtual space that is safe, multicultural, for generational conversations about our issues, honest opinions about the world around us and the effects on our communities, families, physical, emotional, and spiritual health, as well as our well-being with our expert panelists to add much needed insight. Today's topic: do we need to be healed to be in a relationship? I'm going to give you a little bit of what I think about that. At some point in our life, our heart will be broken. Heartbreak shares all of the traditional hallmarks of loss and grief. It can cause severe emotional pain and symptoms of withdrawal. Because when we are in a relationship, the sense of who we are is tied to that other person. So when that person is gone, we're left trying to figure out how to move on and how to operate in this world without them. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions for some interaction. Raise your hand if you've ever experienced a loss through breakup, death, or divorce. How many people survived? Raise your hand. How many people believed it made them better? In other words, did it help you grow? Or did you become bitter? Were you stagnant? Losing a loved one is one of the most distressing and unfortunately common experiences people face because relationships are the single most important area of our lives. Our relationships are the source of all of our best and worst memories. True, man. These relationships can build us, but it's important that we know that these relationships also define us, sustain us, and have the power to break us. We can lose ourselves, and therefore that can lead to grief. Romantic heartbreak can make a sane person act crazy as our heart hijacks our brain, causing us to do shit we would normally do, reacting in ways we usually wouldn't as a response to our traumatic heartache, basically as a response to our grief. So I'm going to ask you guys to do a couple of things, right? Place a thumbs up emoji if you've ever stalked your ex. You guys could tell me. Place a thumbs up emoji if your ex have ever stalked you. Okay. Laugh emoji if you've ever shown up in places that you know that they were going to be at in hopes that they would notice you or talk to you. Place a sick emoji if you've ever made a scene and embarrassed yourself. And because this is an adult platform, I'm going to say to you, place an eggplant emoji if you've ever had sex with them after the breakup, hoping to get them back. You could tell the truth. I know some of you have. Most people experiencing normal grief and bereavement have that period of sorrow and numbness and even guilt and anger. Gradually, these feelings ease, and it is possible to accept the heartbreak. It is possible to move forward. It really is. And you can check out the Mayo Clinic for some of these things that I've told you about. However, heartbreak, because it creates a dramatic, painful, emotional response in our mind, these breakups can cause us to want to believe that it's something equally as dramatic that's causing our pain, equally dramatic as the reason why our loved one is gone. And this is a response, a physical response. Sometimes we also get to the psychological pain and trauma of our heartbreak or our loss of a loved one. I'll give you guys some quick information. Mary Frances O'Connor is a PhD professor at the psychology at the University of Arizona. She's a researcher and an author. And if you guys ever have an opportunity, read her book, The Grieving Brain. And she's done a lot of research and correlation of how our brain processes our loss of our loved ones. Because it's important that we know that heartbreak can mimic the grief of someone dying because it is the death of a relationship. We continue to suffer like addicts until we can rewrite the codes in our brain. And what I mean by that, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, we need to adapt to the fact that our loved one is gone. They've died, they've broken up with us, or they've simply rejected us. It is possible. This involves changes in the brain's processing. We have to change how we think. We have to stop making trips down memory lane. We have to stop stalking their social media. Ladies and gentlemen, you know who you are. We have to stop sending those multiple text messages that's only feeding your emotional trauma and keeping your heart aching and complicating your recovery. You have to be willing to let go and accept that it's over. You have to stop hoping that shit will change, people. It's over because it's supposed to be over. just like someone has transitioned to their next life through death and they're no longer here because they're no longer meant to be here. But losses do leave a void, or sometimes multiple voids in your life. And you have to take the necessary steps to fill those voids. But it's important that I explain it to you because there's a difference between grief and grieving. Grief is the effects of the emotional pain and suffering that comes from the loss. In other words, it will knock you down. It will knock you off your feet. It will wash over you in waves. It's not just limited to the loss of people. You can grieve the loss of a beloved pet. Did you know that some cats live 20 years? Joy! I did not even know that they could live so long, right? You can grieve over the loss of a career. You lost your house. You lost your money. Hello, people. Boy, divorce. You understand? A meaningful relationship. We used to be best friends for 20 years, and then one big blow up, and this person that used to be a best friend, you could tell everything to. You're no longer friends, or as we would say in the Caribbean, you're frenemies, right? Grieving is what happens as we adapt to the loss of our meaningful relationships, our heartbreak, or the fact that our loved one is gone, that they died. It's important to know we feel grief forever. It is tangible. If you choose to, you can reach out and touch it. I know it from experience. For example, a mother who's lost a child, or a child who has lost their mother. Healthy feelings of loss at that moment is fine. But 6 months, 1 year, even 10 years later, people, if you are still experiencing reliving that moment as if it occurred yesterday, this is a sign of depression and a sign that you need help. So let me break it down to you in a nurse way, right? If you were in the hospital and I was walking in to educate you, I would say, your grief is a wound that's going to heal over time, right? But for some people, if that loss is so debilitating and it cannot improve and does not improve over a period of time, even though that time is individualized to different people, then it can be complicated. And they've changed the definition of complicated grief to prolonged grief disorder. But the bottom line is that if these emotions last that long and are that severe, and you're having problems overcoming that loss and resuming some semblance of what we like to call a normal life, that prolonged grief, I would tell you, is like the wound that became infected. None of us are immune to grief. Not one of us. I just want you to know today that there's healthy and there's unhealthy. There's a nurse colleague of mine that brought it to my attention about a heart condition that you can actually have when your heart is broken. Didn't even remember that. And I don't want to mispronunciate that name, so I will text it in the chat for you guys to listen. But you can literally be admitted into the hospital for a broken heart. This is what I'm going to say. It's important to know grief follows its own trajectory, everyone. It can be highly individualized, as I keep telling you, and very unpredictable. Some people will grieve for a short time, referred to, like I said, as acute or a short-term period or phenomena, while others will experience that prolonged grief that I talked to you about, lasting months, years. It becomes so complicated, it becomes depression. Per the American Psychological Association, that complicated grief without help leads to that type of isolation and chronic loneliness and depression that we see many patients hospitalized for. So I'm basically going to turn this over to our expert panelists because they're here to clarify and add insights, right? As to why 43 million of us adults experience emotional and mental issues, yet we're still afraid to talk about our depression. We're still afraid to talk about our heartbreak, right? We're still afraid to admit that we're grieving over things that we feel other people may not think is normal or healthy. So, because moving forward doesn't mean moving on, our expert panelists are here to answer the question: do you need to be healed to be in a relationship? Tiffany?
Thank you, Tracy, for sharing your knowledge and thoughts. And before we begin, I just want to issue a medical disclaimer. This space is not meant to replace your relationship with a licensed counselor, physician, or mental health therapist. This space is to discuss some of the issues affecting our ability or desire for healing, health, and wellness. I am now going to go to Tracy Jones, who will now segue into our discussion by discussing, am I healed or am I healing? How to determine readiness for dating and relationships.
Can't hear you. We can't hear you.
I'm muted. Okay. My name is Tracy Jones, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I am in a private practice in Oakland, California, and I appreciate everybody coming to our table talk today. So as Tiffany said, my talk is about, are you healed or are you healing, and how to determine readiness for dating and relationships. And I'm going to pull up my slideshow. I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
Yes. All right. So basically, I whittled this down to like 4 basic things that I think people need to consider when they want to determine if they're ready to be dating and in a relationship. And the four guidelines are: 1, knowing who you are, being able to trust yourself, being mindful, and being able to take care of yourself. So here we go. So know who you are and own it. I think a lot of times when we say we've had a breakup and we want to be back in the streets, and we may get on the dating apps because we're bored. And it kind of sets you up for repeating cycles and patterns in dating that don't really change. And then you get frustrated because you're like, oh, I keep meeting the same type of people, da 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 da. And so, like, as a therapist, I really work with my clients to figure out, like, who are you? Instead of worrying so much about the other person. Does the other person like me? What do they think about me? Da, 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 da. I think it's more important for you to ask, like, how do I feel when I'm with them? What, more about you and less about them. So that's why I think it's important for you to know what your core values are, what your expectations are, what your standards are. Because I feel like when you know who you are, like, you're certain about that. There's no misgivings about it. And I think when people don't know who they are, then that really sets them up to be misused and mistreated, because they're really looking for somebody else to, like, give them that. And I think that is the inside job that a lot of folks usually come to therapy for. Like, they keep getting in this pattern and it's not working, and they want to do different, but they don't know how. So I think for me, the tenets are really getting to know who you are. And, like, do you know yourself wholeheartedly? 100% no. But, like, if you keep repeating the same patterns, you are the common denominator. It's not the guy or gal that shows up the same way, emotionally unavailable, flaky, making you work for their affection or attention, right? Like, those are all signs of, like, flags, red flags, amber alert, stop, do not pass go. Like, And a lot of times when people are really feeling needy or wanting that validation, they will pursue, and it doesn't end well. It will never end well. So I think the bottom line for this point is that you got to know who you are and own that. Like, be confident in like what your values are, what you expect. Like, how do you want to be treated? What's your standard? Like, is it okay for somebody to text you late at night? Is it okay for people to come over at your house late at night? Like, you know, what are your boundaries around these people that you're dating and meeting? Like, I feel like a lot of times people in dating make it so easy because they don't have standards. They don't know what their values are, that they're sleeping with somebody on the first date and wondering why they don't call them back. Bam. Okay, point 2, trust. Do you trust yourself? You know, how can you trust others if you don't inherently trust yourself, your judgment, your thoughts? Again, you know, like if you're going out into the dating scene looking for somebody to give you direction in your life, like you're not trusting who you are, and you're putting yourself in somebody else's hands that is going to mismanage you, misuse you, and probably abuse you, right? And I mean abuse in a very loose term. And if you don't trust who you are, why are you dating? You know, like, why are you going through this process of trying to meet somebody? Like, what's the motivation? You know, you really got to pay attention to like your thoughts and your environment. So as you're out meeting men or women or them, theys, theirs, you got to really focus on how they show up and show you who they are, because people show you who they are. Like, you really just need to pay attention to that. A lot of times we can get so focused on like the fantasy. You know, you meet this person, they're hecka cool, and you're like, oh man, like you're already talking about let's get married in your mind, right? Like, oh, this is the one, da 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 da. You don't even know their last name, you know, and it's like you're rushing the crush, and you gotta slow down. So you gotta really pay attention to what people are telling you, because if you listen hard enough, they will tell you who they are. So, you know, it's like you gotta start slow when you're out dating. You don't gotta go 0 to 100. Take your time, please. Point 3, mindfulness. It's important to be present and have presence when you are out dating people and meeting people and trying to go on a date or trying to be in a relationship. And just being able to recognize, like, are you being influenced by your past? Are you not over your ex? Is there something from your childhood that is, you know, clouding your judgment? You know, like or are you projecting too far in the future? Like I said, like you on date 2 and you're already like, this is the one, and you're ready to get married. And meanwhile, this other person has no idea that that's where you are. They're just trying to get to know you. And I think another thing that it's important is like how you react or respond differently to triggers instead of falling for the okie doke. So if you are going out and you're dating folks and you recognize like a red flag, right? Past you would be like, oh man, like that red flag in my mind is green, and it means try harder and pretzel myself to like really perform to get this person to like me. And so you know that now, right? Like, I don't need to perform to get somebody to like me. Either they like me or they don't, right? That's the part of number 1, knowing who you are and owning it. So if somebody's like running cold or breadcrumbing you, like, you know, like, pause for the cause, like on to the next. Like this is, I can't repeat the same pattern because I know that I can get caught up and I don't want to get caught up anymore. So I have to be willing to walk away from a situation instead of like forcing a situation. And to quote Bell Hooks, to know love, we have to invest time and commitment. Dreaming that love will save us, solve all our problems, or provide a steady state of bliss or security only keeps us stuck in a wishful fantasy, undermining the real power of love, which is to transform us. Okay, number 4, taking care of yourself. Why are you trying to be in the streets? Why are you trying to dating? Why are you trying to date? Why are you trying to be in a relationship? Like, I ask clients all the time, like that question, and they don't know. They don't have a good answer. They're bored. They're bored, so they get on the app. You know, they need some quick validation, so they're gonna swipe right, and they're gonna get hot under the wheels when like somebody else swipes on them. You know, it's like you got to really figure out like what's your motivation, like why are you doing these things? Because the better you can understand why you want to date and why you want to be in a relationship, the better it's going to help you as you're out there meeting people. You know, are you dating and wanting to be in a relationship because there's some inner problem that you're looking, you know, you want to be saved, you want somebody to save you, you want, you know, your knight in shining armor to come, or your Captain Save-A-Ho with his cape, like, you know, to make your life better. Like, you have to be really honest about like what you want, because again, like people will smell that and they're going to take advantage of that, mismanage you, and then you're going to be pointing the finger at them, look what they did to me, instead of like holding the mirror up to yourself and like taking responsibility for like how you're showing up. And, you know, like another thing is like wanting people to be the authority of your life, right? Like this could be a person that had an absentee parent or a neglectful parent that wasn't available or around. So you go out in life looking to fill that void, and you find somebody, like they could be older. They could be an older person that you're dating, significantly older, like almost a parental figure. And you put them on a pedestal because they're treating you right. They're saying the right things. They're giving you all these things that you didn't get from your family of origin. And you think you've struck gold. And really what you're doing is getting played until it's too late. You know, it's too late. You're knee deep in it. You know, you're pregnant. You're anything could happen. You know, and but this deep down, you know, it don't feel right, but you maybe stay. So as this quote says, and I know this is a little spicy, but are you deep in healing, or are you deep in the game of your victim identity, right? Like this is that taking accountability and responsibility for how you're showing up, right? Like, because what's the narrative that you're telling? Like, oh, poor me, like I keep finding these type of people, da 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 da. And it's like, but how are you showing up, right? Like, you got to be able to take responsibility for yourself and who you are, who you say you are, the things that you want, like not being afraid of like telling the other person like what you're looking for. People don't even want to say that. They want to just go with the flow. What is the flow, right? Like you're not getting your needs met by keeping your mouth closed. And so on that note, like I just wanted to leave it on a light note. Because this is me 10 times out of 10 in therapy, where, you know, you're doing your work with my clients, and boy, man, they come to that session and they're like, what happened? Oh, he called you? Oh, y'all had a booty call? Oh, okay. And it's real. And it's just like, how do we move past this? Like, you know, going back for that makeup sex, whatever, like it never ends well. So, you know, I think it really takes a hard look at yourself to figure out like what makes you feel ready to date, and really dating with intention and purpose. I think, you know, if you want marriage, if you want certain things, like, then you got to date with intention. Like, you just can't be pussyfooting with this person and that person. Like, it's wasting time. And that's why it's important to know who you are and own it, know what your values are, you know, figuring out compatibility. Like, it's got to be beyond looks and somebody's what they got in their pockets. Like, foundationally, like it just has to be. Otherwise you continue to like recycle the same relationships over and over and over again, and you look up and life has passed you by and you wonder why. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and that's all I have for now. And if there's questions, comments.
Thank you, Tracy, for your expertise. I'm going to open it up to the audience. If you have any questions for Tracy Jones, you can either put it in the chat or you can raise your hand and unmute yourself to answer the question, whichever you feel more comfortable with, if you have any questions for her. While you guys are typing your questions, I'm going to start it off by asking Tracy a question. Tracy, how do you know what your core values are?
I think you know your core values by, one, just determining what they are, you know, and like, so maybe people don't know what is a core value. So a core value is like a trait or quality that's not just worthwhile, it's something that represents who you are. Like, it's your deeply held beliefs, like to your core, like fundamentally who the fuck you are, who you stand for, what you stand on, your 10 toes, like that's what you're about. Like, those are your core values. And it behooves you to move in accordance, right? Like, you stand in integrity by being who you are, saying who you are, walking that walk, talking that talk. And if your core value is, I don't know, monogamy or exclusivity, because you really believe that a one-on-one relationship, whatever, right? So you're dating and you meet a guy that's like, oh no, I'm into polyamory. Okay, like, that's not a fucking match. Like, it's not a match. It's not a match. Like, they want something that you don't want, and you value that relationship with one person. That's fine, right? Like, that doesn't mean like, oh no, now, okay, they like polyamory, so now I gotta like be about polyamory to be with them because I like them. It's like, no, the fuck you don't. Like, you don't want to do that. Like, you don't want to share, then don't share and go date the next person. Like, I think we just get so caught up on like, I meet this person and they have to be the one, when it's like, you can enjoy dating and getting to know people until you meet the person that checks, quote unquote, checks the boxes of what you want in a relationship. Like, you don't have to settle. And I find a lot of people settle, you know, like, well, these are my values, but I really like somebody that's gonna give whatchamacallit, like PDA. I really like that. And then you meet a guy that's like, yeah, no, I don't like all that. Like, all that cuddling and shit, like, that ain't for me. And you're like, okay, well, okay, like, how can I, in my mind, like, how can I make this work? And it's like, girl, no, you don't need to try to make it work. Like, he's telling you who he is, and that's not gonna change. So you either, Drake, you know what it was when you signed up, don't complain. If you continue to pursue that and know that you're not going to get your needs met, or you move on and find somebody that likes what you like.
Thank you for that. Does anyone else have any follow-up questions?
Oh,
I
I know. Let me just read what Tracy said.
Thank you.
She said, we have a duty early on in a relationship to bring our best to the table. What we need to stop doing is rushing into a relationship with people who we know 5% of who they are and have fantasy about the other 95%. Should we bring our best at the beginning? How do we know when to hit pause? And this question is from Tracy Miller.
Okay. So what do you mean by hitting pause?
I always do believe that when a person, and you gave some pretty good examples, right? When a person gives you a reason to pause in going forward in a relationship, you should. For example, like you said, you don't believe in being polyamorous, yet they do. That's a pause. You like to be cuddled and held, yet they don't. That's a pause. Why would you continue to move forward in this scenario if the person is already from the beginning showing you that it's not going to be reciprocated, your love language, so to speak, in the way that you need to feel fulfilled? The issue I think a lot of ladies and some even gentlemen have is, at what point do they hit that pause button? At what point do they stop giving a chance?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that goes back to the idea that you need to know who you are and own it. Period. So when red flags are presenting themselves, when people are like, not, like you plan a date the day of they cancel, right? Like, do you give that person a second chance, or do you set yourself up for that repetitive behavior? Right? Like it's where you need to be able to assert yourself and say, like, right, these are my standards, these are my expectations. Like, how many chances am I going to give somebody before I'm done? Right? Like, I can't say 1 and done, 3 and done, whatever, but like a person needs to have in their mind, like, clear, like, this is my standard. Like, if somebody keeps flaking, that's about them. It's not about me. And a lot of times my clients will say, like, well, what's wrong with me? Da, 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 da. And I'm just like, really, can we take it off it being about you and more about them? Because they're showing you who they are. And like, that's not an invitation for you to like run forward and catch them. It's a sign to pull the fuck back and move on. Date somebody else. Like, you don't have to put all your eggs in one basket. Like, really, you don't. And I think sometimes people settle because there's so much feeding our realities about dating, right? That Kevin Samuels guy, like, I mean, you can go on social media and TikTok and people are going to tell you like you ain't shit and how many ways you ain't shit. And, you got to jump through this hoop and be like this and look like that. And like, that'll fuck you up if you really like take that to heart and not know who you are. So it's like the more you know who you are, like, and be about that, like, the less chances somebody can really fuck with you, more or less, like take advantage of you, mismanage you, like, because you are going to be asserting and being direct and upfront about like how you like to be treated, what's okay, what's not okay. And like when somebody's violating those boundaries or trying to bend them, like that doesn't mean like, let me get some tape and help them fix it. It's like, nah, like that about face and goodbye, like on to the next.
Thank you, Tracy. I'm going to go over to Erica now, just so we can keep the discussion timely. Erica is going to segue into our discussion by touching on relationships that we engage in, both romantic or not, is not meant for learning and putting into practice self-awareness, accountability, and open communication along the way.
Okay, so I mean, when we were starting this conversation, Tracy M had brought about all the different types of grief and loss that comes about, whether it's like death or loss of the job, loss of these things, right? And healing is it's not fucking linear. I think in our human selves, we're always thinking, oh, it's going to be, healing looks like this. I'm going to be ready. It's going to be, I'm going to think about it, and then I'm not going to cry anymore. That's what healing looks like. It's just not going to hurt. And I think that's a nice thing in theory that we hope for. And it's not realistic. Like when I'm doing therapy with any person, or even just engaging in just like human conversations with any person, and they talk about healing, what we recognize is it's not linear. What we recognize is that there's this big hope of what it'll look like. And that ends up being like, especially in relationships, as an example of what we're talking about, there are always fucking risks, right? You always it's so important to acknowledge. And that's why I always think that therapy is very radical, because you're really not just acknowledging like your pain and calling it out for what it is. You're allowing to feel it. You're allowing to like label it. You're allowing yourself to be vulnerable in a way to say like, I'm fucked up by this. And, if your therapist or whoever you're seeing, like a professional, if you choose to see a professional, is able to do like the good job, it's really not about, that insecurity of like, I'm fucked up about this choking you, but it's like, I'm fucked up about this. How do I hold this a little bit differently? Because naturally when breakups happen and your heart gets broken in such a way, the first place we go to, as Tracy M was saying, is like, what the fuck did I do? What was wrong with me? That's like the first layer, the internalized thing, right? You get to this place where you're like, what's wrong with me? And that becomes that own, its own healing from that. But then there's another healing process that happens where it's like, okay, I'm able to look at that from a different perspective. Okay, the pain isn't as much. Can I reflect a little bit differently and hold that space where, where did that pain come from? Yeah, I wanted this relationship. Yeah, I was bending myself and I was doing all the things which should have led me to have a relationship. I did all the things this person asked me to. I did everything that was, right. And then the insecurity shows up. How do you hold that insecurity a little bit differently? Versus it also being like the other person. We're talking about what the management is looking like of holding not just your good and bad, but also the perceived like ugly of yourself. That perceived ugly, that perceived insecurity, right? I didn't look a certain way. I wasn't funny enough, and I didn't use my voice enough. There's so many things, but healing is so complex. There's a different version of healing from getting a cut, right? Versus like somebody gets bit by a dog and they're like, I don't fuck with dogs. But then you start dating somebody who has a dog and you're like, I love this dog. You're healed from that, right? There was a trauma, whether it was big T or small T at the time, there was a small trauma that happened and you're like, okay. But then when we also talk about the complexities of trauma, whether it's vicarious trauma, whether it's like poverty, whether it's like violence in your community and all of these things, it builds up a lot of heavy. It builds up a lot of things. And when you're also supposed to heal from those things, that is so fucking hard. And that's why I really appreciate what Tracy M was saying when it comes to, knowing yourself. What are your core values? When I'm doing therapy with anybody, I'm always asking these things. What is it? What do you want? What helps you stay safe? And what are your strengths? I always start with those three things. What do you want? What are your strengths? What helps you stay safe? Those are three things that accompany you from now until the end of time. And those lists will always grow. Naturally, people will always, when it comes to their strengths, they tell me like the resume version. And I'm like, yeah, that's cute. Now, what about the life version? And I think oftentimes what we lack is like compassion towards ourselves to even acknowledge our strengths in that way. Or sometimes we get so caught up into it, like, these are my strengths. So then I'm healed and I shouldn't be hurting or feeling such and such feelings about this person who did me dirty or whatever. Well, it's a process, but I also ask people to step into that place of, well, what did it really feel like? What does it remind you of? How do we hold it a little bit differently? And then does the bitterness turn less into bitterness? And what's that softness look like? Does eventually it turn sweet? even in the ends of relationships, when certain things can be traumatic, and obviously it's very complex, so things are very different if there's violence involved and all these things. But when it comes to healing, what I like to reinforce to people is also recognizing that when you leave a bad thing and you enter something else, or when you leave something and enter something else, there can be a graduation level where it's not just like, I quit this and it's like the hard X. It can also be you, when you know your core values, when you know yourself, or you recognize safety looks like this. I can hang out with this person, but I don't feel safe. And oftentimes when I'm talking about safety to clients, they're like physical safety? Yeah, like I carry mace, or, I come correct, like I'm a woman in the world or whatever. Like and I'm like, well, let's look at all the safeties. What helps you stay safe? Because when you're also able to identify what helps you stay safe, we're talking about like emotions, right? We're talking about when I don't feel good, I need a person to A, B, C, D, the love languages. How does somebody step in to do that? How do you, and how do you accept? Because sometimes we assume that if I'm speaking this love language, know my love language, and that's how this will work. But it's also recognizing when you're in a relationship, the communication is so important. What are you being clear about? When shit gets tough, that's when people tell you who they are too. Because that's when you're recognizing, are we on the same page? When you're saying you're committing to like working on something hard, people show you who they are when shit gets hard. And oftentimes we get really caught up, especially with pandemic dating. I mean, and I'm not dating. I haven't been dating in a long time. I'm married, and I don't even know what I'd be like in these streets. I don't even know how to talk to people these days. But especially during the pandemic, even my clients, whether they were 20 to 65, if they had gotten a divorce or were just, starting dating, whether they graduated, college and they're starting their career, whatever, right? What I realized too is the pandemic did something where in the loneliness, even though I could be working with somebody for so many years and we've established what their standards are, what their core values are, what all these things are, then the pandemic hit and they're like, I'm lonely as fuck. And if I have to do 10 isolate for 10 more days, but then take this test and then hang out with this person and then da-da-da-da-da, you know what? Yeah, my standards are going to be a little bit different. But I'm going to convince myself, and that's okay. And they would, commit for whatever it was because there was convenience. It's messed up a lot of people. And even more so after, now that the pandemic is, has eased up a little bit, and depending on what people feel about all of that, now people are in these streets and it's like, I'm not taking anything seriously. I'm just like trying to meet people because I'm trying to catch up on all the things that I didn't get to do. People's mind states aren't right. And so I appreciate when Tracy J was talking about intent, because intent is really important. Like even my clients, one of my clients, she had been engaged to marry somebody. And then a month before, he basically came out as being gay. And they had been together for years. And she was fucked up. So obviously we're processing through some trauma. She's like, I'm not ready to date yet. And I'm like, that's fine. That's fine. And then as we're sitting in session, she's like, it was like maybe 6 months out. She was like, I think I'm ready to date, but I don't know. She was hesitant. And she wanted to say it, but she also was like, I just feel like it's bad. And I was like, just say it. She's like, I kind of just want to be out there to sleep with somebody. And I was like, I think that intent is very clear. So what do you do to stay safe when you are doing that, if that's your intent? I think there's a real power in that authenticity of knowing what your intent is. I'm looking for a relationship. I'm not looking for a relationship. If I'm looking for a relationship, what is the slow burn? There are definitely some red flags to look out for, but this is a slow burn and you're worth the slow fucking burn. I don't even understand how many clients in the last 6 months have gotten married quickly or engaged and now they're in crisis, because I think it's pandemic trauma. It's a lot of these things that are kind of like coming together. Sometimes depending on what age you are, it's the pressure of, I'm supposed to get married by this time. I'm supposed to have a kid by this time. I'm supposed to meet all these deadlines, even knowing this person wasn't right, but I got these things to do. These things are complicated. There's no easy way to do it, but there is a way that you can reflect and learn and hold what you're learning, even in the pain, even the hardest of pain, the most painful of pains, like the pain that makes you like cry and fall asleep, like that Erykah Badu Green Eyes Mama's Gun album 2000 where it's like 3 parts of that breakup, pain. You could still learn from that, but it takes time to just kind of breathe through it and recognize, right, I'm here. This sucks. This hurts. I went internal. I felt something was wrong with me, but when I can also hold my strengths and recognize, oh no, you know what? I did this differently. I did this differently. And just because this didn't work out doesn't mean something is wrong with me. I can give myself props for every single time I'm interacting with somebody and I'm learning a little something about myself, even if it's just a regular relationship, not a whole ass romantic relationship, but that you learn something about yourself. That does build your confidence if you allow yourself to see it and recognize it. And I think oftentimes we don't do that, or we're not taught to do that, which is why having, Tracy J is a friend for a long time. It matters to have your people hold you accountable. It matters to, build your tribe and have a village that looks different and has different experiences, and it's important to know that you could receive love in a lot of different ways. And love doesn't just look one way, just as healing doesn't look one way, that it takes a lot of time. It's worth the slow burn, and you can't always do it alone. So.
Thank you, Erica. I see that Tracy Miller said, how many of you have a relationship model? But can I ask you, Erica, is it important to have a relationship model?
Now, well, let's get into some clinical stuff. Because obviously relationship models, that's based on, and it depends on what you see, who you see, why, how honest are they about their problems, all of these things, right? If I were to look at my parents' relationship, would I have ever gotten married? Absolutely not. If I were to go based on them, absolutely not, right? And that was the model. But what I find is even as I'm getting older, and for folks who are married, who actually can, and even with the couples that I work with, I think there's a really beautiful thing to recognize that people grow, and people can definitely outgrow each other, but there is a point that love does become a choice. It becomes a choice. There's parts of us that get excited about the newness of the relationships, what you learn, all of those things. And then there is a point in relationships, and I've been in a long-term relationship, and I've seen clients who've been together for a long time. So it's an interesting thing where I'm like, isn't it funny how the one thing that you fucking loved about that person, you loved the shit out of that one thing that they did, you fucking hate now? You fucking hate it, right? Because over these long-term relationships, you build resentments, you build all these things. It does become such an internalized journey, but we also expect and have unrealistic expectations of other people as if they're going to serve us a certain way, do a certain thing. And that's why it is important to have your core values. It is important to question some of these things. Relationships are not fucking easy. They seemed easy in the past because nobody talked. And then people got to talking, and then people could be like, oh, I got to find my bliss. And da, 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 da. Divorce was easier. People were okay to step into the stigma. But that's kind of a beautiful thing about that too. When you can say, yeah, this shit isn't working. I've outgrown this. I got to go. Right? I mean, so many people that I know, have stayed in relationships even when the shit was bad. And for whatever reason, I think it's whatever reason. There's no judgment. But I think when a person is going through those things, it is important to understand, like, when you're going through those things, you're looking at your relationship, you can reflect on somebody else's, because people could be like, Will Smith and Jada Pinkett goals. Okay, now how does that apply to you? I mean, does it? But what I do know is applicable is being able to communicate, and hopefully being able to, when people are communicating, and they're able to have the hard discussions and can acknowledge that it's a hard time. And just because it's a hard time, it doesn't mean we're out. It's like, how do we continue working? And knowing that things might not be the best perfect fit, but can you get to such a compromise that you feel like, you know what? No, this is because our relationship isn't just this one thing. I can recognize our relationship being a lot of things. Oftentimes when people become resentful in their relationships too, they focus on the things that the person is not doing. Well, what about their value though too? Because there's also a reason of why you decided to be with that person. So how do we reflect on that and hold that a little bit differently? Because obviously, I mean, I'm sorry, no disrespect, but women run shit. Women do all the things. So when we also recognize in our own relationships and what we've done, it's like, oh shit, have I enabled this motherfucker too? Wow. That's accountability. Can you hold that accountability? And how do you move through to let go of some of that power and control? It's not easy. This is complicated shit, but that's why there's professionals to walk you through that shit. So, but yes, I mean, I think that, when you find people in your circle or know of people that you could just see communicate well, where they get each other, it's not that they've been that way the whole time. They've worked at it. And how, I think, is always really important to ask, like, what is it? Sometimes shit is performative, and this TikTok, Facebook, TikTok, IG, whatever, all that world, everybody's like posing the most perfect pictures of shit. And it's a fucking fallacy. It's performative. Show me that real shit. Show me when you mad. Show me pictures of yourselves when you're mad at each other and what you did there. I'd read it. I would, but I don't know if I even answered the question. So.
Thank you. I'm just going to read what DeAndre said. He just made a statement. Know thyself, and to thine own self be true. I'm going to ask a question to the panelists. If I were to say to you, emotions change, what would be your thoughts on that statement?
CJ?
You said why emotions change?
No, just emotions change. Like, what does that statement mean to you? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, you are probably in the honeymoon phase of a relationship, and that changes. That's not forever. People want easy, they want immediate, and to be in a relationship with another person, you are, that takes time, and people change, you change, they change. So the expectations of how y'all move in life change. You grow old, right? You live a life together, a lifetime. Who you are at 20 isn't who you are at 40, isn't who you are at 75, right? It ain't about your looks, it ain't about your body type, it's about your advanced healthcare directive, what do you want to happen?
Your DPOA.
That's the real talk. That's the real talk as you
401k.
Honest, and it's
yeah.
So, when you're dating, right? I'm
right.
gonna be putting I may die one day. How is this person gonna take care of me?
Correct.
My needs, that's where I'd be looking, not how cute they are.
I'm ready for my answer.
Yes, Tracy Miller.
Yes, darling. Emotions definitely change, just like people. That's the one constant in this world that we can certainly depend on. I think what a lot of us fail to realize is that everybody has a relationship history. Our relationship history starts at our birth. And I'm going to tell you how, from our birth and our environment and our families that we surround ourselves and our friends, how it begins to shape us and sometimes fuck with us. Sometimes we get too much or too little of what we need as we're growing up. You understand? Sometimes it's absent what we need. Sometimes it's not enough. And let me explain to you what I mean by that, right? Sometimes you get attention too much. Sometimes you get neglect too much. We all know the severe cases, right, in life, because right, we here, we're mandated reporters, and we would have to report the severe cases, and we meet people who've lived those severe cases, who have those traumas with them. They're 40 years old and still talking about when they were 16 and there was only 2 pieces of chicken on the plate, and everybody used to eat the chicken before them and used to eat their piece of chicken, or silly little stuff that mom never hugged them when they were growing up. Maybe mom didn't know how to hug. But I say all that to say, you have to determine, like Tracy Jones said, and Erica also touched on, you have to determine yourself in terms of, were you raised to be self-reliant? Were you raised to be interdependent, dependent? Were you raised to collaborate or to compete? Were you raised to believe in autonomy, meaning, hey, man, I'm going to do this on my own, or loyalty. Because if what you've been raised with, right, doesn't align with the person you're trying to be with, then it will not work. No matter how much you fool yourself, no matter how much you pretend to be healed, unless you get a professional to help you navigate the intricacies and the fabric of what's been woven into your system from birth, you just can't straighten it out like that. So yes, emotions do change, but sometimes we need help.
And I'm gonna also say too, I think it's important to recognize too. I mean, again, when we talk about healing, you know, when you're talking about healing, whether it's healing from a relationship, but then you also realize your relationship that you're in is impacted by the relationships that you had or didn't have growing up. All of it is so interconnected. It's so very interlinked. But I think it's also important that when people are kind of exploring what they're doing, you know, and who they are, to even find out, you know, a lot of times people have found out what their love language is, but also have you done a little test or a little like, quiz about what your attachment style is? What's your attachment style? Because oftentimes, you know, people who, you know, if you haven't had strong attachments, sometimes you're looking for unavailable people, and that's a part of the pattern. And what is that about? That's something deeper, you know? So even trying to understand your attachment style, of which, you know, if you chose to see like some type of clinician, they'd be able to help you kind of through that and identify that and actually acknowledge some of the deeper pains that are impacting your relationships as an adult, you know? It's always important to kind of visit these things. And then again, in that authenticity and that radical compassion towards self, to be able to hold that pain differently, because that in itself is its own grief and loss. It's its own grief and loss, and there's own healing from that. That would definitely help you also come to a different place of holding your pain to then heal differently to get into these other relationships that are a little bit healthier. Might not be the one, but are you learning, because you're breaking your own patterns and cycles as you move forward, because you have a different awareness of what your pain looks like, where it comes from, and how you can hold it differently as you move forward.
Thank you, Erica. I just want to thank everyone for being a part of this discussion and including our panelists. We really appreciate it. And please be sure to be on the lookout for next month's virtual event. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Saffron Giving, SAFFRON Giving. Tracy, Miller, do you have any last words?
Let me unmute. Yes, I would like everybody to also follow our panelists. We've included their information on the flyer in the interest of time, and it's certainly posted on our social media handles as well. If you guys feel as though you'd be interested in reaching out to them, they're both into their own private practice, both Erica and Tracy Jones. Please do. Hey, everyone,
Thanks,
at some
Tracy.
point, we all need help to
Thank
heal. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Tiffany. This has been
Thank
real.
you.
Be
Enjoy the
safe.
rest of
Have
your
a
day,
great
everybody.
weekend. Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.